Welcome back to SuperBike Intelligence. If you've ever found yourself standing in a garage late at night, helmet still warm, engine ticking as it cools, just staring at a bike and thinking, this thing says something about me, then you're exactly where this conversation starts. And yeah, before we go any further, if you enjoy these kinds of honest, slightly uncomfortable motorcycle conversations, you already know what to do. Stick around, tap like if something hits home, and if you've got an opinion, and I know you will, leave it in the comments. This one's going to split the room. Because I'm going to say something that sounds controversial, but really shouldn't be. Harley-Davidson is not about motorcycles, and it never was. Now, before someone slams the keyboard and types, "You don't get it," or "You've never owned one," just pause with me for a second. I'm not saying Harley doesn't make motorcycles. They obviously do. Big ones, loud ones, heavy ones, bikes that shake your spine at idle and make windows rattle when you roll past cafes pretending you don't notice people looking. But that's not the point. Harley isn't about horsepower, or lap times, or even engineering brilliance in the way we usually measure it. Harley is about something far messier, something far more human: identity. Think about the first time you ever heard a Harley startup, not on YouTube, not through headphones, in real life. Maybe you were a kid. Maybe you were standing at a traffic light and suddenly the ground felt like it vibrated just a little differently. That uneven idle, that offbeat thump, the way it didn't sound like it wanted a rev, but like it wanted to exist. It didn't ask for attention, it assumed it. That moment sticks. Not because it was fast, not because it was smooth, but because it felt like a presence. That's the thing most people miss when they argue about Harley-Davidson. They argue specs, they argue price, they argue reliability charts and dyno graphs. And all of that completely misses why the brand has survived when so many technically better manufacturers have come and gone. Harley doesn't sell motorcycles. Harley sells permission. Permission to belong to something older than you. Permission to slow down in a world obsessed with speed. Permission to say, yeah, I know this isn't the smartest choice, but it's my choice. You ever notice how defensive Harley riders can be? That's not insecurity. That's ownership of identity. When someone criticizes a Harley, it doesn't feel like they're criticizing a product. It feels like they're criticizing a way of life. And that's why the debates get heated so fast. Because no one gets offended when you insult a toaster. Picture this. Cold morning, you walk into the garage, concrete floor, slight smell of fuel and oil. You thumb the starter. The bike doesn't leap to life. It wakes up. The whole machine shudders like a dog shaking off sleep. And for a moment, before you even move, you feel like you're part of a ritual that hasn't changed in decades. That's not engineering efficiency. That's storytelling. Harley-Davidson understood something very early that most motorcycle brands still struggle with. Riders don't fall in love with machines. They fall in love with what machines say about who they are. That's why Harley riders wave at each other differently. That's why group rides feel less like, let's go fast, and more like, let's go together. That's why a Harley parked outside a bar tells a story before the rider even takes their helmet off. And this is where people get uncomfortable. Because if Harley isn't about motorcycles, then what are motorcycles really about? Look at how riders choose bikes. We pretend it's rational. We pretend it's about performance per pound or value per dollar. But no one chooses a bike that way. They choose a bike because it fits a version of themselves they want to project. The track day guy wants precision. The ADV rider wants possibility. The naked bike rider wants rebellion with restraint. And the Harley rider, they want continuity. They want to feel connected to something that existed before algorithms told us what to like. That's why Harley feels stubborn. Because it is stubborn. On purpose. When the world moved to liquid cooling, Harley resisted. When everything became lighter, higher revving, more digital, Harley leaned harder into weight, torque, and feel. Not because they couldn't change, but because changing too much would break the illusion. And yes, illusion is the right word. Not in a bad way, in a powerful way. A Harley doesn't ask, how fast can we go? It asks, Who are you when no one's watching? That's why critics get frustrated, because from the outside, it doesn't make sense. Why would you choose something heavier, slower, less refined? Why would you defend a brand that charges premium money for what appears, on paper, to be outdated? Because on paper, emotions don't exist. Take a late-night ride through the city, traffic lights reflecting off chrome, the sound bouncing off buildings. You're not racing anyone. You're not proving anything. You're just moving through space with intent. That feeling, that sense of presence, is the product. And that's why Harley-Davidson is discussed more than it's ridden. People argue about Harley the way they argue about music genres, fashion eras, or cultural movements. You don't hear people debating mid-range sport tours like this. You don't see endless comment wars over sensible motorcycles. Harley creates friction, and friction creates relevance. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Harley riders don't care if you approve. That alone is a marketing miracle. In a world where brands beg for validation through influencers and algorithms, Harley riders often feel like they're opting out of the conversation entirely. They're not chasing trends. They're protecting a bubble of sound, feel, and ritual that doesn't need external permission. That's also why Harley attracts criticism. When something refuses to evolve on your terms, it feels threatening. Now let's talk about rivals for a moment. Not by name, but by feeling. Other cruisers may be smoother, faster, more reliable, cheaper. And many of them are excellent motorcycles, truly. But emotionally, they often feel like interpretations rather than origins. Harley feels like the language, others feel like translations. And translations can be perfect, but they rarely carry the same soul. This isn't about American pride or nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia. It's about cultural gravity. Harley didn't just build bikes, they built imagery, movies, music, posters, jackets, symbols. Entire wardrobes and attitudes formed around a sound and a silhouette. That's why even people who hate Harley can't stop talking about it. Love it or hate it, it lives rent-free in your head. You ever notice how a Harley at a traffic light doesn't look like it's waiting? It looks like it's choosing to stop. That's intentional. Everything about the experience is designed to feel deliberate, not efficient. And here's where it unites riders more than divides them. Deep down, every motorcyclist understands this feeling, even if they'd never ride a Harley, even if they'd never admit it. They understand the desire to feel something raw and personal through a machine. Harley just leaned all the way into that truth and never looked back. That's why younger riders are confused by it, and older riders are fiercely loyal. And why debates flare up every time Harley tries to modernize, because modernization threatens the story. And stories are fragile. If this is resonating, if you've ever felt torn between logic and emotion when choosing a bike, hit that like button. It helps more than you think, and it tells me these kinds of conversations matter to you too. Here's the irony that really messes with people's heads. Harley-Davidson might survive the future because it isn't about motorcycles, electric bikes, autonomous vehicles, changing ownership models. All of that threatens manufacturers who define themselves by performance metrics. But Harley defines itself by feeling, and feelings adapt. The engine note might change, the drivetrain might change, but the identity, that can be preserved, if they're careful. Because at its core, Harley isn't selling metal, it's selling belonging, ritual, story. That's why people get tattoos of the logo. That's why they pass bikes down through families. That's why selling a Harley feels emotional in a way selling most bikes never does. You're not selling transport. You're selling a chapter of your life. And that's why this brand will always divide riders. Because not everyone wants their motorcycle to mean that much. Some people just want to ride. And that's perfectly okay. But others want their bike to say something before they ever open their mouth. So I'll leave you with this. If Harley-Davidson really isn't about motorcycles, what is your bike about? Is it speed, freedom, control, escape, belonging? Or is it just a machine that gets you from one place to another? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, especially the ones that disagree with me. And if you're new here, welcome to SuperBike Intelligence. Subscribe if you want more conversations that don't fit neatly into spec sheets. Because the most interesting thing about motorcycles was never the motorcycle itself.